Nicholas Price and Evan Kaplan. Now, the interesting thing here is we got a chance to see Nicholas Price just for like one game. It didn't go very well. This was the Naya tokens that we saw the last round that you and I were in. These players are both 8-2 coming into the round. In the hands of Evan Kaplan, a little more standard issue here, Temur adventures.
Yeah. And this is a matchup that Nicholas is much happier playing against than the one that we saw in the previous matchup where he was playing against Shota with just all kinds of sweepers. The Temur Adventures deck has more one-for-one removal. Not a lot of removal either. You just have the 4 copies of Stomp in the main traditionally. So, Nicholas, the key to this matchup is to have a really, really quick start. Yaspera Sentinel, one of the cards that he's probably looking for, so that he can develop a really wide board and just kind of overwhelm Evan Kaplan here before Evan can take over. Because if the game kind of becomes a bit of a stalemate and Evan can kind of stabilize, then all of a sudden you're going to see him cast cards like Alrund's Epiphany with a board of bigger creatures and take over.
Right, so let's see what happens as this thing plays out. You can see our players are taking a look here at their opening hands. And it looks like that one was actually a mulligan there for Nick.
Yeah, he had an Edgewall Innkeeper, but no adventure creatures, and it looked pretty slow. So it looks like he wanted to see something that maybe could come out a little bit faster. Here, I mean, we have lands and spells. I can't imagine you really want to go down to 5. Your win rate just drastically decreases here. I know he doesn't have the ideal quick start. We don't see a Clarion Spirit here or Edgewall Innkeeper, but I mean, I think you're going to have to just try to make it work with this hand. And, Giant Killer, actually quite a strong card in this matchup, as it kills potentially 4 creatures. You have the Goldspan Dragons, the Lovestruck Beast, and Kazandu Mammoth once a land has been played.
How worried is Nick about Evan's capability to kill him quickly, right? You see a card like Showdown of the Scalds in hand here for Nicholas, and, that's the kind of thing where if you can be not dead and cast that card and get to untap, you can really do some stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It's huge. And that's what Nicholas needs a lot of help here. You want him. He really needs to be able to kind of curve out here, play a couple of creatures, and have them on the board before this Showdown of the Skulls enters the battlefield.
He's going to run out the Giant Killer here on turn number 1 before passing the turn back over to Evan's turn 2. He's looking at the options on Edgewall Innkeeper or maybe just using Stomp right now.
Yeah, and one thing to consider here is the fact that Nick's it's actually interesting. He's playing Mountains, but guess what? Only 2 Bonecrusher Giants. And I think that changes the way Evan is approaching this game. Oftentimes, you hold Edgewall Innkeeper to get value because you're playing against a deck with Mountains and Bonecrusher Giant. But if you're only playing against a deck with 2 Bonecrusher Giants, then they're very unlikely to have one.
Unless, of course, they have one.
Facts.
As we can see. There's that Bonecrusher. Alrund's Epiphany off the top of the library may give Evan a place to put some mana, but won't be relevant for the game for quite a while. And let's see if he just wants to go ahead and run out the Bonecrusher Giant. He does have the option to cast the second Edgewall Innkeeper and still get, I don't know if it's greedy, but go for the most value here. Use Stomp to kill the Giant Killer and then try to follow up with Bonecrusher Giant.
Yeah, the thing is, I mean, I think you just want to run out the Edgewall Innkeeper. Evan really wants to find a land next turn. So by running out the Edgewall Innkeeper, I mean, you still have 2 plays this turn. It's very, very strong. You go
Still
Edgewall Innkeeper into Stomp on the Giant Killer, and then you're really well set up next turn. Even if Nick happens to have one of his 2 Bonecrushers, he's still going to have the other one in play to be able to draw a card off this Bonecrusher.
Okay, there's the Edgewall Innkeeper. And Nicholas Price says, okay, that's probably not great news for me.
Yeah, I mean...
So he's going to tap down one of the Innkeepers here on end step. So far, Evan's staying patient with that Stomp. He's just waiting. Another copy of Giant Killer into hand here for Price.
And as Giant Killer is a human, he can't even mutate that Gem Razor onto the Giant Killer. Even if you wanted to maybe try to put on some pressure here. So I mean, this start that we're seeing from Nicholas is not typical. I know so far we've seen 2 games from Nicholas, and they've both just been him just not doing a whole lot. This is not typical from what you see from this Naya Tokens deck. And I mean, look at his record. He's been winning a ton of matches with this deck. It's just he just hasn't been able to find those types of draws so far in the future match area.
Yeah, you got to feel for him. We've had him on camera twice now, and this is how it's been. Really tough for him. There's Giant Killer to take out the well, the Giant, as it were. But unfortunately for Nicholas, yeah, he still takes the 2 damage, still takes another 2. He gets the creature off the battlefield, but really the damage was done when Evan played it, drew the 2 cards, and even hit the land drop that you were talking about before, Paul.
Yeah, at this point, it's just a little bit too late. I mean, Evan's got 2 Edgewall Innkeepers in play. Nicholas has no answers. Evan just has, you know, he's got 3 adventure creatures in his hand. I mean, he just kind of basically has it all here. And at this point, if I'm Evan, I'm probably just looking to cast this Bone Crusher Giant. I mean, you could actually just play out a Brazen Borrower instead if you really do value the Stomp and you want to get this Giant Killer off the battlefield. And if you do that, then you just run out of Brazen Borrower and keep up a red source to potentially draw a land and cast Stomp. Which is what I think he's considering, because he initially started with the Bone Crusher Giant, and now it looks like he might want to go with the Brazen Borrower here. The nice thing about having Brazen Borrower, too, is given that Nicholas has played nothing, it's pretty likely that he has a Giant Killer in hand, right? That's one of the spells that he can probably have. And by running out the Brazen Borrower, you get to kind of play around Chop Down here.
Kind of funny. He didn't actually find the land that he was looking for, but he found a 3rd copy of Edgewall Innkeeper. Yep. So it's going to go on the battlefield. We're going to see Chop Down take care of Bone Crusher Giant. But as we mentioned, you know, there's kind of no way to go wrong here for Evan. I mean, even in the less efficient line, he's like, well, I'm going to draw 2 extra cards. Like, he could just sort of start throwing spells on the stack at this point and be ahead if Nicholas can't do something about it.
Right, but just Stomp is such a strong card in this matchup specifically because, you know, you have the Clarion Spirit, you have Edgewall Innkeeper, you want to be able to use the Bone Crusher Giant as a removal effect if you can. But, you know, the Clarion Spirit here was a great draw here for Nicholas Price. Now he's got 4 creatures on the battlefield, and next turn is going to hopefully try to stick the Showdown of the Skalds.
That's right. Showdown's a bit of a slow card, but it is very powerful, effectively netting you up to 4 cards, and then a whole bunch of +1/+1 counters get thrown around in subsequent turns after that. It can really do a lot of work, but it isn't the type of card that necessarily wins you the game when it enters the battlefield. It's usually the next turn where you can actually capitalize on it.
Yeah, and Evans has to find some lands here. Let's just say extremely likely to find a land or the 4th Edgewall Innkeeper. Okay. There it is.
He hit one. Ooh, Evan says, okay, you made me sweat it out, but I did hit land number 5 here with Fabled Passage as well as the 4th Innkeeper.
Is there such a thing as drawing too many cards?
Nope, not that I'm aware of.
I mean, because we can go Innkeeper number 4 into Lovestruck Beast.
Yeah. See, now you're talking business here, Paul. I like where you're going now.
The alternative, of course, is to just keep up Petty Theft here on the Brazen Borrower. But actually, Evan's drawn so many cards, he's going to have to discard down to hand size here if he doesn't play out one of his cards.
Yeah, 1 or 2 of them.
What a terrible problem to have.
Yeah. Yeah, poor... Oh,
look at that.
It. That's also going to be a bit of a sign, though, for Nicholas, right? That he knows he could have cast that 4th Edgewall Innkeeper and chose not to. So he's saying, well, you're purposely leaving up something. What could it be? And yeah, probably Petty Theft's going to be on his mind here. That said, he's going to run out Showdown of the Skalds here, Paul, and see what he can do about it.
And I imagine at this point, Evan's going to bounce the Clarion Spirit here in response, because if the Showdown resolves, it's very likely that Nicholas will be able to play another spell here to put another token into the battlefield. So by responding and bouncing the Clarion Spirit, there will be no way for Nicholas to be able to generate another token.
Nicholas can't do anything about this as it goes back into hand. Showdown of the Skalds, though, hits the battlefield. Let's see what he hits. Another Spirit of Beast, another Showdown in a Forest. Wow.
Yeah, this next turn is going to be big. I imagine you just kind of want to maximize your mana here. So you can play a Forest and run out the Clarion Spirit, and then set up for the next turn.
Yeah, you have that. It goes all the way till your next turn, and then you lose the cards. So
Right.
you really want to try to use them while you got them. And there goes Fabled Passage to go get a Plains. And we'll see that Clarion Spirit hit the battlefield. But unfortunately for Nicholas, that's going to be the end of the turn for him. Nothing really else to do other than chip in for 1 with the Spirit token.
Yeah, but Evan is now setting up for a pretty huge turn here. A lot of different options. He can run out a Goldspan Dragon here, make a treasure token, and still keep Upside coming if he wants. He can choose to play out, I guess, a Great Henge and draw more cards, but I don't think that's what he really needs to do. Of course, finding an extra mana source would be really helpful, as he does have an Alrund's Epiphany in his hand. But the important thing here for, if you're Evan, is to just minimize the damage of next turn. Because next turn, you're going to see lots of +1/+1 counters enter the battlefield. Because you're going to see Nick lead with Clarion Spirit into making a 1/1 off the Lovestruck Beast, into playing another Lovestruck Beast, or potentially even another Showdown of the Scald. So that's at least 3 tokens here that you're going to see, 3 +1/+1 counters that you're going to see from the Showdown.
All right, let's see what happens. The Showdown of the Scalds, Lovestruck Beasts are still in exile from the original Showdown, but every time Nicholas casts a spell this turn, he gets to put a counter on something. So this is really it. This is Nicholas Price's big stand here. If he can translate this into a board state that looks remotely stable, he may be able to capitalize going forward. But if he can't, I mean, look at the hand of Evan Kaplan. It is absolutely stacked, and it doesn't look like it's going to get any worse here either with the triple Innkeeper out.
Yeah. And the thing is, Evan's at 20 life, right?
Yeah.
You're going to put some counters on these creatures, and if you attack, what are you going to do? Take like 6 or 7 damage? And then what happens? Evan gets to untap with a 5/5, a Goldspan Dragon, and an Alrund's Epiphany.
Yeah. So Nicholas is doing the best he can to fight, but boy, the slow start from him, he mulliganed into a slow hand, and it has not paid off for him. As Edgewall Innkeeper ×3, in fact, actually ×4, but the 3 on the battlefield have kept Evan Kaplan's land drops flowing as well as his hand stocked on spells. And Nicholas is going to keep things rolling forward here with another Showdown of the Scalds off of the first one.
Yeah, and this is going to lock up the game here. Evan's going to be able to attack for 4. Even if Nicholas chooses to block, we're going to see an Alrund's Epiphany get... let's see. Does he have the mana to actually... I guess if he draws a land, he can go Alrund's Epiphany and bounce the token.
Oh, he can do both. I see. Yeah, because he can also just Goldspan Dragon to cast the Epiphany, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay.
He is definitely casting the Epiphany. The question is if he can find a land off the top, he can play Alrund's Epiphany and bounce the token.
Can
Which means that's...
Oh, with the land. Okay, I get you. Yeah.
Right.
7/2, it all... Oh, it's a tap land, though.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to have to see some chump blocks here from Nicholas's side, right? This Lovestruck Beast also gets to get in, so we're probably going to see a 1/1 get in front of that. The token get in front of the Goldspan Dragon, and then we're going to see an Alrund's Epiphany plus 2 more flying tokens next turn.
First things first, he wants to get in there, particularly with the Goldspan Dragon for its mana production abilities.
Yeah, it's basically a 3-mana 4/4 flying haste, right?
You get a rebate. How about that?
Well, you get 2 back.
Yeah.
And I imagine this Alrund's Epiphany is very likely to lead to a concession.
Yeah, that does seem to be the name of the game here.
Yeah. Could also make sure you have 1 green left, so you can make a 1/1 token here too off Lovestruck Beast.
Did happen. And play your land and say go to yourself. The best feeling.
Yeah.
And we're going to see Petty Theft just to make sure to clear the way. It looks like, but there's 6 damage in the air.
Yeah, 6 damage in the air. I don't think it's going to be quite lethal. Even if we block a Clarion Spirit, a 5/5 and a 1/1 gets blocked, and then we'll see 9 damage go in.
But the way that Nicholas's deck is built means that he just can't do anything on the next turn.
Not
right?
at all.
The best he can do is play a bunch of little creatures and They die. All right, and Nicholas is going to go ahead and pack them up. So an intense game number one between these two players. Evan Kaplan getting the job done. He had a very good draw, and it must be said, Nicholas on that mulligan, his draw was not very good at all. He maneuvered the best he could and tried to use Showdown of the Scalds to recoup some advantage, but it wasn't nearly enough, just far too slow. And we're going to head into game number two between these two players. If you're just tuning in, a couple of updates. One, these players are 8-2, so they are near the top of the pack as far as the standings go. There's a group of players at 8-2, and these are two of them. The other thing is, this is the last standard round of the day. We're going to be switching over to historic after this round, and that'll take us for the final 4 rounds of the day and to our top 8. Top 8 is going to be tomorrow, and it's going to be standard.
Yeah, and we can see Nicholas choosing to board out the gem raisers that he has in the main. The only target being the Great Henge that Evan has, but trying to have more answers to some of the cheap creatures. The Glass Caskets and the Bone Crusher Giants means that it's far less likely for Evan to kind of run away with the game with those Edgewell Innkeepers that we saw in the first game. And really interesting here on Evan's side, he's choosing to board in. He actually boarded out a dragon, but he's more importantly, it looks like he's choosing to board in an Embercleave out of the sideboard. And I think that's a nod to the fact that Nick's deck is really good at producing a bunch of chump blockers. Oh. And by having the one Embercleave, you can just kind of kill your opponent out of nowhere if they're just trying to block with Clarion Spirit tokens.
That's interesting. That really does give you the ability to go over the top of your opponent's strategy. Even though it's not really fundamental to what Evan's doing, that's a nice tool to have in the toolbox there.
It's something that I might lean towards having if I'm on the play, not on the draw. The problem with Embercleave when you're on the draw, the thing is if you're Evan, you're playing the role of the control deck, I want to say, if you're on the draw, right? Nicholas's deck is the deck that's far more explosive, right? It gets out the gate and wants to put a bunch of creatures on the battlefield. And if you have something like a card like Embercleave in your opener, it's just not going to do a whole lot until you've turned the corner and stabilized the game.
All right, take a look at the opener here.
There's the Embercleave.
Yeah, and he's got the cleave in the opener. This hand looks fine, though. He's got Cragcrown Pathway plus Edgewall. He's got the Lovestruck Beast. And the Brazen Borrower, though that's going to need a little help mana-wise, but still. It's good.
Yeah, I think the only thing Evan is concerned about with this hand is just the fact that he has 0 interaction in his hand. He has a bunch of removal in his deck, but the only thing that he has is the Brazen Borrower, and he doesn't have the mana for it. So
yeah, he can't cast that yet, yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, you have an Edgewell Innkeeper, you have a Lovestruck Beast, which does a really good job of getting in the way, barring a chop down from Nicholas Price, of course. And this is exactly the type of hand that this is the reason why you want to play this Naya Adventures deck, right? You go Jaspera Sentinel, turn 1, turn 2 Clarion Spirit into Edgewell Innkeeper, and you have 4 creatures on the battlefield.
That's some business. This is another mulligan, by the way, from Nicholas, but he found a hand that he can actually work with. So let's see if he can get off to that really quick start.
Yeah, and if you look at Evan's hand, he has no interaction.
None.
So this Edgewell Innkeeper and this Clarion Spirit can just kind of go out of control here.
Still no blue source here for Evan Kaplan, so the Brazen Borrower / Petty Theft is going to have to stay at home, as he's going to run out a pair of Edgewell Innkeepers and try to set up for future turns.
So Nick wants, okay.
2 Giant Killers in hand, but remember the Innkeeper will keep those cards flowing here for Nicholas, and he finds Kabira Takedown.
Yeah, which is just
that's a hard removal spell.
2 mana murder at this point, right?
It really is.
Kill a creature.
Wow. That is impressive.
And
already
Nick right
doing
now,
5.
Yeah, and Nick is just, Nick really does want to play out a second creature here because he does want to get that extra token here off the Clarion Spirit. So doesn't really need the chop down, doesn't need to value it as much because he has that Kabira Takedown in hand. And this is just, I mean, without sweepers, like, how do you come back from this?
Right, he's so far ahead on board at this point, having just dumped 7 creatures on the battlefield. And Nicholas says, finally, this is why I brought this deck to the field. Yeah. This is why I'm 8-2.
Yeah. I'm sure he's just looking at all of us. He's like, by the way, this is what my deck does.
Right.
You know those games where I don't play anything till turn 4? That is not my deck. This is what I'm trying to do.
Guys, I swear, this deck is good. I swear.
Yeah. It's not like Evan had a horrible draw. He went double Innkeeper into turn 3 Love Struck Beast, and it's not going to be close here.
No, it doesn't look like it. Interestingly as well, it looks like Nicholas can just ignore the whole Edgewall Innkeeper thing. Doesn't really matter how many cards are in hand for Evan at this point. It's more of a mana situation. He can only spend so much mana per turn, and he's so far behind on board.
Yeah, next turn, Nick's going to be able to go Kabira, take down your creature, and stomp Edgewall Innkeeper, and make a 1/1 token.
Wow. He found a land off the top, but goodness sakes.
I suppose he could also just go stomp into Bonecrusher Giant, because I don't think this Kazandu Mammoth is that much of a threat. Just keep the card flow coming.
Curious to see how he approaches this, because getting rid of the Mammoth would allow him a bit more damage to get through here if he feels that he needs to press his advantage right here and right now.
Yeah.
Also, this is like one of the very few decks that really punishes Edgewall Innkeeper for just being a 1/1, right? Like a lot of decks, it just sits there and they either have to use removal on it or it doesn't. But here it's like, no, it's really a liability, that you spent 2 cards and the best they can do is trade off with something small on my side. And look at this. He is going all in, Paul. Yeah. He took down that elephant and slammed.
I'm sure Nicholas is going, please double block my Clarion Spirit, please.
Yes.
That's what he's setting up for. Yeah, no matter what happens, he is going to stomp the other Edgewall Innkeeper. Unless it just chump blocks, which I highly doubt that's going to happen.
Does he stomp the one that's not blocking or the one that is? you give up a damage, but
Oh, no.
Oh, look at this. Double Edgewall Innkeeper. And Nicholas Price leans back in his chair like, please lock that block in. Look at him. Look at him. He's got his finger on the Bonecrusher Giant. He's ready. He's like, Evan, push the button, Evan. Okay. Evan's too smart. So let's see what Nicholas does here. He can just let the trade happen and leave his opponent with no board whatsoever, and that's exactly what happens. Edgewall Innkeeper's trade. In the meantime, though, a bunch of damage rolling in. Down to 10 goes Evan Kaplan. Oof. And is it just too late? And by the way, that Embercleave, yuck.
Yeah.
Looks terrible here.
And the thing is, I mean, the Giant Killer also just does a good job of just locking down this Love Struck Beast as well. And guess what? Another Edgewall Innkeeper. So that means we're going to see another 1/1 flyer, and Nick will be able to replace that Bonecrusher Giant that he has in hand, or in the exile zone.
In the meantime, he gets a chip in for 3 in the air. The Love Struck Beast doing a good job of holding the ground game. There's the Edgewall Innkeeper. There's the Bonecrusher Giant. There's the token and the card going into hand. And it's Toski. Oh, man. If Evan doesn't give up here, we could see a really absurd Toski ship with everything attack.
Yeah.
I
don't think he really needs it, but
come on.
It's a thing.
You're also not doing it.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is quite, but you could also consider double tapping here, right? Tap
if you
the
wanted
Love
to
Struck
be
Beast into token and then attack for lethal.
Well, that's the act of a coward, though.
I didn't consider that angle.
It's all about Toski. All right.
And he tapped out. So now you know for sure. Does Crack? Oh, he doesn't have a second white source. But even if you tap down the Love Struck Beast and you attack with everything, that would be 9 damage. So that's lethal.
So he has lethal on board. All right. No Toski needed.
No Toski.
He can keep that a secret for now and just use the cards that he has on the battlefield to get the job done. And finally, we got to see this deck do its thing here from Nicholas Price in game number 2, as he was able to capitalize on, it wasn't a bad draw from Evan, but just a much slower one than what Nicholas had, as he gets in for plenty enough lethal and secures game number 2. He's going to force a game 3 here against Evan.
Yeah. And again, I mean, Evan had a perfectly reasonable hand there. You can't fault him too much, and he did also spend some time thinking about whether or not he should keep that hand because of the lack of interaction. If you don't have an answer, I think not even the Edgewall Innkeeper, it's the Clarion Spirit. If you don't have a way to kill that early, I mean that's going to generate 2 or 3 tokens for Nicholas over the course of that game, and that with Nicholas being on the plate, that might just be way too much to overcome.
Yeah, I think it generated him a token every turn, including the turn that it entered the battlefield. I mean, and those are good. Those are flyers. Like they really got a lot of work done there. And we didn't even see Nicholas capitalize on having the big built out board, which this deck can absolutely do, right? It can grow out that board, go wide, and then build it up tall. It didn't even need to. That was just like a bunch of 1 and 2 power creatures swarming Evan and getting the job done.
Yeah, I'm actually a little surprised that those Gargaroths are in the sideboard. I know Chop Down is a card that Nicholas is going to have, but the thing is, I mean, almost all your creatures get chopped down, right? So you can just formulate a game plan where that's kind of one of the last creatures that you play, and if it does stick, then Nicholas's deck is going to have a tough time getting through that Gargaroth.
Yeah, they only have so many of those.
Right. We do see an extra copy of Embercleave. We are on the play, and being on the play is huge, right? This now allows you to potentially have a more proactive plan for this matchup.
It is kind of funny. I'm looking at the win percentages for these players, and it's kind of funny because they have pretty similar win percentages, but flopped. Nicholas does much better in Historic than he does in Standard, but the opposite is true for Evan, who has a much lower Historic win percentage than he does in Standard. And that could just be where they focus their energy, right? A lot of times it's just like, well, I play a whole bunch of Standard and I'll dabble around in Historic, try out some brews or something. So you don't want to take too much from it, but it is kind of interesting that at least as this sits here, Nicholas is the underdog as far as, playing Standard, and probably is chomping at the bit to get this round done and get in there to the Historic rounds again starting next round.
And this is a much better hand here for Evan Kaplan.
Whoa.
We've got the Edgewall Innkeeper. We have the Bone Crusher Giant. So this is going to be a pretty easy keep here from Evan.
Can Nicholas just keep a hand one time ever?
Well, I guess he's mulligan basically every single game.
Every time we've seen him, yeah.
Oh no, and he
just did again. So he just mulligan again. We can't quite see his hand, or his choice, but he's like very unhappy with it.
This is a bad 6, so he's considering whether or not he wants to go to 5. Oh, jeez.
Not what you want to see.
Yeah, so I imagine, you can get really greedy and just put 2 lands on the bottom, but it looks like his plan is to just hope to draw a creature, get that Felidar Retreat out on turn 3, and try to win off of that. But yeah, much rougher start here.
Oh, you see the head shake there from Nicholas Price. He does have the Yespera Sentinel to kick things off, but we have simply a very strong hand here from Evan Kaplan versus a tough mulligan situation here for Nick.
Yeah. So you're going to see a Stomp. You don't have to use Stomp right away, right? Because if Nicholas doesn't play a creature next turn, then you might not have to use the Stomp immediately. But there is that threat. You are definitely scared of that potential turn two play he had last game, which was Clarion Spirit into 1-drop off the Yespera Sentinel.
By the way, Paul, chat's bringing the high-level strategic advice here. I rarely mulligan for this reason. Oh, if only Nick would have known.
Nick, have you considered not mulliganing?
Right, because when you mulligan, you only have 5 cards and it's harder to win. So,
never
thought of it.
Those are facts.
Let's see if Nicholas can get something going here. Is there anything he can get rolling? Is Felidar Retreat?
That's right now, that's his game plan. So I think we're going to just see him attack here for 1, run out a Giant Killer, right? Because that gives him an additional source of mana to play out a turn 3 Felidar Retreat. Not a whole lot of decisions here if you're on Nick's side. You just kind of play your cards and hope. You could maybe try to play a slightly longer game here and hold up Chop Down and try to value out your Adventures opponent, but that's not going to be a winning line.
All right. Yes, Sparrow Sentinel attack. Play a giant killer, and it looks like Evan's gonna try to keep the mana at bay here from Nicholas, which is a smart play. He does have 4 mana play that he'd love to be able to put on the battlefield next turn and give him some hope. And in the meantime, Nicholas is just gonna sit back in his chair, kind of ponder how the day's gone so far, because he just doesn't really have any choices at this point.
Yeah, down to 5. That's a showdown. That's going to let him refill his hand. But, you know, now Evan's going to be able to turn it around and put on a pretty big turn next turn. He's got a Kazandu Mammoth, which could potentially attack for 5, although it will get tapped down. But next turn, he's going to go Edgewall Innkeeper into Bone Crusher Giant.
And Evan is going to kind of force the issue here. Play a land, get that Kazandu Mammoth up to a 5/5, which is going to get tapped down. But, you know, come on, this is standard, right? You cannot take your time by spending 2 mana per turn just to tap down an opposing creature and expect to get ahead. The level of power in these decks is way too high above that. Now, this is land number 4 here for Nicholas Price, and there's a Felidar Retreat and a Showdown of the Scald. So we could see Showdown perhaps start to replenish, but is it too late? It feels like it.
Yeah, it's just way too late. I mean, Evan's got a Fabled Passage here, too. So that means that this Kazandu Mammoth is attacking for 7. You know? So
it's huge.
I mean, at this point, I mean, you can just do this. You can stomp the Giant Killer and then attack for 7 and then play out another Bone Crusher here. Alternatively, you can just keep
12,
up...
right?
Excuse me, 12. Alternatively, you can just choose not to play Bone Crusher Giant and just keep Upside Coming, right?
Right.
And you still have like a huge attack, and there's no real risk of somehow something going horribly wrong. I can't even imagine what that would be, but...
Agreed. So it looks like Evan Kaplan's going to be able to finish things off here against Nicholas Price. Impressive. You know, the games that he won, games 1 and 3, were a bit of a rout. He never really fell behind, and he kind of showed the versatility that the Temur Adventures deck brings to the table, and that he's basically able to change his deck to accommodate what his opponent's doing. In this case, he can kill a bunch of small creatures and go over the top of them, and that's what he needs to do. Here, saw it coming on Clarion Spirit. That's coming out of the Showdown of the Scalds zone here.
Yeah, and with 3 mana, I mean, you can make a 2/3 Yespera Sentinel and kill an Edgewall Innkeeper. But then, you know, if Evan has a land here, or yeah, that also gets it done. That's going to be an attack for 7, and then you can stomp for the win.
That's right. Bone Crusher Giants for days here for Evan Kaplan as he slams in, reduces Nicholas Price to just 1 life, and a stomp is going to finish things off. Evan Kaplan improves to 9-2 as we start to transition over to Historic. Things looking very good for Evan. He just needs to keep the wheels on in Historic.